Well, welcome to the anti-war room. It is Washington, D.C., the week of the district work period, the first congressional district work period of this Congress. Erik Kanegis is with us here from the American Friends Service Committee, and Darcy Scott Martin from True Majority is with us as well. We're going to talk about what happened last week and what it means, what's going on this week around the country, and then we're going to talk about what's coming up when the Congress returns next week, what's on the agenda, and what it all means. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Again. Okay, let's talk about last week. We had this vote, the non-binding vote in the House on the Iraq War. Of course, it passed. The Senate was unable to have a vote because they couldn't get enough votes to have a debate, let alone a vote. Darcy, what does this all mean?
It was a very interesting and kind of wild week for Congress because typically they are very much in control of what happens. And in this particular set of debates, a lot of strategy went into why they happened at certain times and how it all played out. But there were also a lot of things up in the air. I think Republicans really didn't know how many of their members would stick with them in what was thought to be a solidarity vote for the president. But we're also looking to elections coming up in 2008. So on Friday, after 3 days of debate that allowed for every member to have 5 minutes, although some chose to take it and some got more for different reasons, the vote ended up being 246 to 182, with 17 Republicans joining with the Democrats. There had certainly been bandied about prior to the vote much larger numbers of Republican defections possible. That did not happen.
Now, was that just spin hype? They wanted to up the expectation so it didn't look quite as bad to have 17 Republicans feel out?
Potentially. Numbers fly around for a lot of reasons. There's also people who make very specific votes for what they later explain to their constituents for very specific reasons. There were a number of Republicans who said, if this statement had been stronger, I would have voted for it, but because it was not binding, I would not. That would be the logic of a Ron Paul or somebody who has a pretty strong kind of stick to the Constitution. Roscoe Bartlett from Maryland, people like that have a very certain view of what legislation is supposed to be. That led to an opportunity in the Senate, which, although it was a vote for permission to have a vote to vote on legislation, really was
welcome to Washington.
A strategic opportunity because there was enough heat in the atmosphere of the House having its vote that this Saturday, very unusual Saturday session that senators had, which caused quite a kerfuffle for Senate candidates running for president,
it's like being sent to detention if you're in school, right?
And Senator Lieberman from Connecticut had to walk from his house in Georgetown because he walks on Saturdays.
Oh.
And a vote which had happened mere weeks before, which had been solidly divided on party lines, 5 Republicans switched and voted with the Democrats to allow the debate. It was not 60, but it was a significant movement and a marker set down by a number of senators on the Republican side, especially who are very nervous about 2008. The Norm Colemans, the Susan Collins, the folks who are going to be up for election again, who perceive or try to present themselves as moderates.
So is this because then they've got an election coming up and they're hearing from people at home and they were basically bowing to the pressure from home as opposed to bowing to the pressure from leadership? Is that essentially what was going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They know that they have votes that need to be garnered, and it's not even 2 years away anymore, and money to be raised, and their constituents are hot about this issue.
Okay, so speaking of pressure from home, now members of Congress are home,
right.
And we know that many people who are watching this are involved in a campaign, if you will, to talk with members of Congress when they're home. Right. What are you hearing, Aura? What's going on out there?
Well, I think it's a very exciting time for people at the grassroots to be talking to their members because their members are in flux. They're trying to figure out where to stand on this issue, and I think there's a very complex range of pressures on members right now from their party, from their constituents, and hopefully from their own gut. And I think some of what will change the conversation in Washington is what members hear from home. And I think there are 2 things that I would hope people will be hearing this week from home. And one is that we need to reframe this conversation to the real issue at hand. We have a conversation about money coming up. The supplemental appropriations for this war are coming up. And I think you've heard folks from both parties talking about a concern for not cutting funding for the troops. And I think one of the very important things that we can be saying now is this is not a conversation about money for the troops. This is a conversation about money to send the troops to Iraq and keep the troops in Iraq.
So this is a big, big issue, right? Because
Right.
the Republicans are going to, and the supporters of the president are going to frame this as, do you support the troops or not?
Right. And, you know, I think we've seen some news articles about my next-door neighbor, Walter Reed Hospital, where convalescing veterans are having a very difficult time receiving care, receiving their disability benefits. They feel incredibly left behind. And money for veterans is money for the troops, and money for bringing our troops home is money for the troops. I think it's a mistake to confuse funding to continue a war with funding to take care of troops.
So there's on the one hand funding for the mission,
Right.
funding for the president, and this misguided war on the
Right.
one hand.
Right.
It's money for the troops
Right.
on the other
Right.
hand. And you know, the other interesting thing about this is that the president, as we now know from the Inspector General, as we now know from independent reports, literally hundreds of our soldiers in Iraq have died precisely because they didn't have protective armor that otherwise would have kept them alive. And it raises the question of, well, what do you mean support our troops?
Right, right. Well, and I think it's the wrong conversation. So wherever you are on the spectrum of how quickly troops should come home, the conversation about money needs to be about what do we fund to build our security for the future. And we've already got military leaders, the administration and others saying this is not something that has a military solution. It has a political solution. And we all know from our history books that wars end with peace talks. So whether we have those peace talks next month, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, there's going to need to be a movement toward coming to the table with groups in Iraq, and there are some groups that are coming together looking for what the political solution might be. And it's going to involve the regional partners. It's going to have to involve Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, Iran. That's what will make our country more secure in the future. And we need to invest in that. We need to put our money where our security really is.
So now we're talking money. The rubber meets the road. This is the real power of Congress. And, of course, it's the supplemental appropriation that is going to be first up in terms of Congress's ability to use the power of the purse. And a supplemental appropriation is simply additional money that the president needs above and beyond the budget that was passed last year to get us between now and the end of September, right, to the beginning of the next fiscal year, October 1st. We're talking $93 billion more, largely going to Iraq. And as we heard last week, right here, we heard Congressman Jack Murther describe his approach to the supplemental appropriation, which would, according to his what he told us, it would require that troops be fully certified as full combat ready. Deployments cannot be extended beyond 1 year. Troops must have at least 1 year at home between deployments. The stop-loss program where soldiers are forced to extend their enlistments beyond what they agreed to, that is prohibited. And then there'll be a prohibition on an attack on Iran unless Congress authorizes it, a prohibition of the construction of permanent military bases, close Guantanamo Bay, bulldoze Abu Ghraib into rubble, and substantially reduce private security contractors and establish greater accountability for those. Now, that is obviously a way for Congress to focus its power of the purse on meeting specific objectives. Already, the Republicans, and certainly the commies on the right, are attacking Congressman Murther. One of their attacks, by the way, is the fact that Congressman Murther actually laid that strategy out right here on this website. So that was rather interesting. But they're attacking Congressman Murther, and I would imagine people are going to hear this perhaps at home. That number one, that he is not supporting the troops by taking away the reinforcements that the troops in Iraq need, and number two, Congress should not be micromanaging the war. How is this going to play out? What are you bracing for, Darcy, as you get ready for Congress to come back and we start to argue these very points?
Well, it is the case that Mr. Murtha actually puts that bill together. So as the person who gets to create the bill that goes to the floor, it doesn't really matter how mad some other folks get about it. He is able to put some teeth into some of these specific issues that he really cares about. Obviously, making a piece of legislation that passes in Congress involves a lot of negotiating, and he will have to talk to other people about what they agree to about certain aspects of this. But we will see a number of those points there. I also wanted to mention when we were talking about the at-home aspects, although this is the week that people are at home, members of Congress, it is also the case that in the next few weeks, and you'll be able to find it on the website, there will be town hall meetings across the country in districts talking about what people would like to see in the supplemental, that it is important that constituents across the country be involved in what the process is and how our money gets spent. Once we actually get to the floor, the chance that the supplemental will not pass is pretty slim. However, there will probably be a certain number of Democrats who've spoken out against supplementals in the past who will want to have some kind of a signifying vote prior to the final passage that indicates that they don't approve of the supplemental process at all. Right. And that will easily have up to 100 Democrats voting for it when they then agree that they will follow up by voting for the supplemental that Mr. Murtha has crafted.
Right. So, in other words, they would ask, in this case, the Rules Committee that sets the rules for when these bills go onto the floor, they will ask for an opportunity to vote against any additional money, regardless of what kind of strings are attached to them, before they then have this supplemental in front of them. And it would be on that basis that they would vote for the supplemental. I would imagine that there are some who would vote against the supplemental under any circumstances. Is that
yes,
is
absolutely.
That
there will be a few members of Congress who, by conscience, right. I would specifically think probably Congresswoman Barbara Lee and a number of other advocates who have voted against all the supplementals, and there's probably about 20 in Congress now who voted against all the supplementals, who will continue to do that, and that is something that they are absolutely doing as it represents the constituents in their district, and it's appropriate.
And we're going to talk more about that next week, but I think the important point that I think you make, Darcy, which is a very good point, is that we don't know what is going to end up being in the supplemental right now. Right. We know what Congressman Murtha wants. He talked about the various things being considered, but we don't know, and one of the things that members need to hear from their constituents are what do you want to have in that supplemental? What kind of strings should be attached? And that's our mission this week. Hearing anything from the folks at True Majority out in the hinterlands?
We are having
Darcy?
some wonderful lobby days this week. There will be more opportunities from a wide variety of outreach groups in district, everything from folks rallying at their legislators' district office, taking cookies to people who are agreed with. True Majority had lobby days yesterday, and we'll continue to roll them through the week. And folks across the country are trying to make their members know now, this week, how they feel about the war in Iraq.
Working Assets, MoveOn.org, AFSC, a number of groups in this coalition are working very hard in the districts, and we're going to be hearing from them next week to hear exactly what happened and talk more about this supplemental, which is scheduled, according to Congressman Murtha, for the 14th of March. So that's the target date. We've got a little bit of time. But we, right now, are out of time. Thanks very much for joining the Anti-War Room, a weekly discussion of strategy and issues before the Congress. We'll see you next week.